Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson, and writer and teacher Jessica from Washington State. We are online at what-s-left.webnon.com, and you can find the link to our blog in the episode notes. You can also find our personal social media handles at Don Eduardo and at ZepDKE. Jessica, I don't have your social media handles. You'll have to share it at the end of the episode. And please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, share your favorite episode, jot down our information where you found this episode. Thank you. All right, so today we'll be discussing Ukraine, part two, a continuation of the current event discussion since we last spoke, because I wasn't a part of that discussion. You two were, and Kenny was a part of that discussion, but Kenny is not with us today, so he will be absent for today's discussion. If you two can fill us in, since there was a discussion that I was not a part of some time ago, and Kenny's not here with us, so yes, so pick it up from there, Jessica or Andy. Thank you.
Yeah, well, first off, again, welcome back again, Eduardo. I'm very happy to have you here. And it's unfortunate Kenny can't be here because this is, while we're returning to the issue of Ukraine, I also do want to revisit some of the things that were said in the episode 2 weeks ago. We entitled it Ukraine on the Brain or something like that. And Jessica, you're going to help make sure I'm saying this accurately, because at the time I was pretty clear about saying, there's not going to be a ground invasion. There's not going to be Russia. This is all a smoke and mirrors thing. Largely, I was putting it in terms of the U.S. I was putting it in terms that saying that the U.S. ruling class was making a lot of noise about things that were sort of regular. I even cited the fact that there had been a previous troop movement in Russia up to those same regions back in April 2021, and nothing happened. I was essentially predicting a similar sort of thing, and that I think, if I remember right, I was basically saying that this is an attempt to kind of change our field of vision from the COVID narrative to this momentarily distraction. In fact, there were some things going on around COVID at the time, a Supreme Court ruling that took place while this was taking place, and so I was claiming that this was a distraction, and I think that was completely wrong. So the reason I want to talk about that is, in getting that completely wrong, it has helped me sort of say, okay, why was I thinking that? And what do I think is really going on? And I'd like to do that for two reasons. One, I've listened to some of the people who also I felt got it wrong in the same way, because they're mostly non-Marxists, because I think they've been getting COVID right. And most of them have kind of, I have to say, don't want to admit they got it wrong. They want to kind of change the subject, or rather reframe it in a particular way. And I think that's a mistake. And I don't think it's honest. And I actually think it's bad science, because I do actually think the reason I said what I said was not because I was 100% sure of it, but I was 80% sure, with the 20% understanding that Russia could go in and invade. It could happen. I knew that, but I didn't think that was likely. And I'll talk about why, and I'll talk about why I think I got that wrong, and what I think it means that I got it wrong. But I feel like I've now learned a lot about what my real orientation is around this moment is, by getting it wrong, making a prediction, getting it wrong, and then trying to make sense of what happened. So that's what I hope to kind of go through in this episode. And I told Jessica and Eduardo that I might be taking up a lot of time in this episode. So we'll see.
I cannot believe that was only 2 weeks ago that we had that conversation. That's crazy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us, we all got it wrong. I don't think any of us were expecting things to escalate to what they did. I didn't hear anybody in independent media. I mean, I don't listen to everybody, but I didn't hear anybody really predict this accurately. So yeah, I'm excited to hear what you think about why that is, and how, how people are kind of, I don't know, not backtracking, but like you said, reframing it. I will say that I think you were right in one sense, Andy, that, I mean, yes, there is an actual invasion, but there's definitely plenty of smoke and mirrors. I mean, I still don't know quite what to think of this. I don't know quite what my stance is, but I do know I don't believe a fucking word that's coming out of our media's mouth, our politicians, any of that. And I mean, COVID, like 2-3 weeks ago, we were all still like super in COVID land. I mean, I can't remember how long it's been since the Canadian truckers were, basically stamped out. But it hasn't been that long. It's pretty much just been a sudden and very seamless transition from COVID to war propaganda. I mean, I've never seen anything like this. It's wild. So, yeah, no, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and Eduardo, you're gonna have to jump in because when you want, because even what Jessica's saying is reminding me of something, which is, Jessica, in that episode 2 weeks ago, you had said, well, Andy, before I had said that I thought this was a smoke and mirror operation, essentially. It's a simplification, but basically that's what I was saying, that the US was throwing sand in our eyes around something because this wasn't going to happen. And so it was a political palate cleansing of the working class minds as they try to get us to think about something else, which I, again, say is wrong. But you said, well, Andy, you were the one who said World War III. And I kind of blew that off. I was like, because I have said World War III over and over and over again. But I was like, no, that ain't going to happen. But I think in you reminding me I had said World War III, that has helped recenter me in terms of, because this war that we're seeing, and it is a war, is not between Ukraine and Russia. It's not between the regions of the Donbass and the Ukrainians. This is a war between Russia and the United States. And there's many ways you can know that. But one of the ways,
I think Russia and NATO, because the UK, I mean.
Well, let me just say this. The reason I call it a war between Russia and the United States, and NATO will be involved, they're trying to try to be gathered, but they're not just siding the direction, is if there was a settlement reached, when they talk about reaching a settlement, who do they talk about? They talk about US at the table and they talk about Russia at the table. And that's pretty much it. And those are the players. So my starting point is to say that now with the war being with this thing now becoming a war, that it is officially a war, but the beginnings of a war between the United States and Russia. Could it pull back? Yes. Could it grow fast more? Yes. And so I do believe we are looking at a scenario that is like the beginning of World War III. Will they pull away from it so World War III doesn't happen this time? Could. But I do believe, as a person the guy who wrote in The Federalist, who had done simulations in 2019, and this is more like a conservative think tank, they had done multiple simulations of how a war would play out if Russia invaded Ukraine, and they had all these reasons for doing it, was around fascism and blah, blah, blah. And basically most of the scenarios ended with the limited nuclear war turning into larger nuclear war. And almost all estimates, if I remember, were 1 billion deaths, right? 1 billion people dead. So this happened now. And so my claim is that what we're looking at is a war between the United States and Russia. And I think it's been backed by the fact that now the United States has chosen to backfill Polish fighter jets if Poland puts them into Ukraine. We are stepping deeper and deeper into a situation where two nuclear powers are making direct contact in a violent collision. So that's my first thing I'll say is this. I believe Jessica was right in reminding me. I talked about World War III, and I believe we are looking at a possible detonator for that kind of thing. And I should have known that, and I'll say why. I think I should have known that this was actually likely as opposed to unlikely. Because the reason I said it wasn't going to happen is while my head thought World War III is possible, my heart ain't ready for it. And now I have to align my heart to understand, no, the way the world, and in fact, I'll say this, I was looking at this war as a distraction from COVID. It's actually, and I should have known this again, and I'll say more about it, it's a continuation, actually. this event is a continuation of the crisis that had led to the COVID thing, all the COVID stuff and all the reorganization of the economy. So in fact, the very thing that I was thinking of as a diversion and a deflection is actually a continuation of the kind of crisis that we would expect to see in a global capitalist system that has run into a situation where profits are harder and harder to come by.
I'd like to know what you think. Well, your thoughts on what you think is a continuation. I think for me, what I think is a continuation are two big things. I think one, this is a continuation of tightening groupthink and way of being able to view the world. This is more censorship. And second, I think that it's a continuation of a way to blame the failure of capitalism in the way that inflation and recessions and are going to happen. And we can blame it, whether it be war or whether it be immigration or whether it be a pandemic or whether it be, another country. We blame it on another country. Now, I think that the next biggest threat is going to be cyber attacks. Like this is the 21st century, and we're going to be seeing how that's going to be, who knows, this might be conspiratorial, but how at some point there's going to be a unification or of big tech partnering together to cover up that these cyber attacks are the reasons why the economy is the way that the economy is, which is a recession and all of this up and down of capitalism. No, and so I think those are the two areas where I see this as a continuation of more of the same. So I'll speak to the first. If you see anything in the media, it's very difficult to have alternative views, just like it is difficult to have alternative views around COVID. And I posted something on my own Facebook, which people can follow me at, but I posted something where something was shared within a group, both of you saw it, a group picture of Batman and Robin, where you hate anti-vaxxers, and then now you hate Russians, right? It's that change or that a narrative in the media that we are beating the drums of war. And you also have nationalism arising from both Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, and from Marco Rubio, and from both left and right. This is very similar, right? Because it's very unified in the way of thinking in the USA. And there's no mention about Biden's ties to Ukraine and Hunter Biden and his connection because of his son, corrupt dealings there, and the whole his emails, which there's new proof that one of the reasons why Glenn Greenwald, my favorite journalist, is got kicked out of The Intercept, right? Because of more of that trying to cover up for politicians and more of censorship. So there's just amount. I mean, we can link it. I don't have to go into it, but there's enough information that we can see from his reporting around Hunter Biden's connection. And Joe Biden has long time interest in Ukraine. So I see it as a very direct link. I don't see what the USA has. Maybe you both might differ here. I don't see how there is a benefit to the USA. Ukraine doesn't necessarily have a benefit, except that it's very close to Russia. But as in terms as resource, I'm not sure. It was clear why Bush. I remember when I was part of the anti-war movement, why Bush went to the Middle East. Right? There's a overtaking of resources there for big oil. Right? And if we see now, mostly oil in Russia is mostly serving Germany, which is why I see it as hesitant. But I don't see it as a big resourceful, direct advantage to the USA, except that it wants to monopolize and it can expand its imperial powers, and it's on the border. That's the only thing. But as far as resources per se, I'm not sure what their benefit is, and maybe you two might defer there. So and of course, NATO is mostly funded and controlled by the USA. So it's just an excuse, I think, to say, well, every country has its right to be a part of NATO and to be sovereign. I do believe that the Ukrainian people have a right to be independent. I think any country has a right to be independent, and that goes for Cornwall, that goes for in Spain, that goes for Catalonia, and that goes for any region that wants to be independent. And I think that that's something that I'll always support, right? In the same way that I think it was unpopular to support, and I've changed it when I thought about it, for Brexit, right? If you are voting and you as a country are deciding to come out of a union, in that case it was the EU, right? Then you should have that right. You should always. I'm always going to support a fight for independence, but I'm not sure exactly if that's the sentiment. It's difficult because you can't really read the sentiment of the people because everything is censored. But Zelensky, the president, wants to be part of NATO, and that's always been part of the plan as far as the US plan. So I think I'm going all over the place here. I'm just sort of trying to make sense of it in my head, where I'm thinking, there is a provocation, but the provocation started with the USA, namely Joe Biden, and this is this is what, just like Bush, I see it this way for me. Just like Bush was interested in the Middle East, I see Biden in the same way being interested in the Eastern Europe. This is my view. I can't though, but what I'm strictly mostly going to be focusing, I guess, for me, is just how much suppression there is in the media to say anything around this. That's my angle, because that's what I keep fearing. We're beginning to tighten, and liberals, it's the left that's really pushing this. It's all the big tech monopolies. It's all of this banning of speech that I'm concerned about. The Ukrainian people have to figure out what they want, and they have to fight. Ultimately, this is their fight, and we have to stay out of it. And if the Ukrainian people, and we've discussed similarly what Syrian people and the Kurds and Turkey, and we've discussed other in episodes, if the Ukrainian people ask for the USA to support, that's just another, you're going to be screwed as well. I mean, you have two countries are wanting to be a savior, and that's just going to be that's going to be tricked on both ends of it. So they have to really fight for their independence, and I support that independence, but I do not support the support or the help, and I'm quoting there, of intervention, because it's never gone well. It's never gone well for the people. It's always the working class being screwed over and being taken over and part of the imperialist agenda. That's what I think this is all about. And I think I'll say one other thing, and then I'll stop, because I've mentioned lots of points here. Sanctions were started in Europe with small proxy wars, when there was Greece, when there was Yugoslavia, when they're trying to stay away from militaristic intervention. Sanctions were a way to put that pressure of on the people to stop their governments. And and the USA adopted sanctions, and I was reading a little bit about that history, and I don't have right now all of the list of countries, but it was a long list of countries where the USA has sanctioned. And on there is Venezuela, on there's Cuba, on there is North Korea. There's a lot of countries, but if you look at it, there aren't, like, the pressure. Sanctions haven't really worked. They haven't worked in trying to change regimes. Yes, a few countries have given into that pressure, but on Myanmar, and all of the countries that we're seeing today, like North Korea and Venezuela, it's not going to change what we think the USA is trying to do. There's just no change. So sanctions always affect the working class, always affect the poor. And I was reading that, with all these new sanctions on Russia, there's going to be, the middle class is just going to, there's not going to be a middle class anymore. And I feel for the people of Russia, and I feel for the people of Ukraine as well, right? But that's my point of view on sanctions. And I used to think, if you remember, like episodes in the very beginning of What's Left, I used to think maybe it could potentially, cajole or try to corral a country into change. But once I've read more, once now I've been involved in this in these political discussions, and I see it's just not going to, for Iran and for other countries, it just doesn't work. It's always the people like us that get affected. So those are my points that I came up with, and I can speak more about them, but I'll stop there. I think we can all have a discussion around any of those topics that I brought up.
Well, my belief on sanctions is that they're an act of war. I mean, they only hurt the people. So, I mean, I suppose in some respect, yeah, they can like cajole support, but only by starving people out or, depriving them of basic needs. And yeah, I'm excited to hear, Andy, your kind of articulation or perspective on like how this is part of the COVID stuff, because I do think it's, I mean, COVID maybe, but the reset, I mean, yeah, this, like, we're already seeing like an economic reset, like they're crashing the economy on purpose. Like you just heard Joe Biden, right, say, yeah, well, oil prices, they're going to go up, they're going up. I mean, it's worse in Europe because they get so much more of their oil from Russia. I do think, like, I mean, I don't know. I don't know as much as I wish I did about the sort of economic side of things, but I think a lot of it is total lies and manipulation. I think we have plenty of oil. I think the United States has plenty of oil. I read today, because Canada has also banned imports of Russian crude. And I saw Corey Morningstar posted something about apparently Canada hasn't even gotten any of their crude from Russia since 2019. And yet, what's happening up there? The same thing as here. Their prices are all going up. It doesn't make any fucking sense. I mean, it's just crazy. So I totally think this is part of strategic, targeted economic reset. Food prices are going, I mean, everything is going up. And like you said, Eduardo, like it's the working class that's going to suffer. It's always right. I mean, I think in some sense, it, like with the distraction from COVID stuff, like it already just in 2 weeks, like it has interrupted and kind of subverted some of the, like the collective solidarity that's built up over the past 2 years around COVID and in opposition to governments and institutional policies. And so in that sense, I mean, there's nothing that unifies empire like war, right? I mean, there's just, it's the number one thing, right, in terms of rallying in the US, like bipartisan support, bipartisan predator class. It's just, war propaganda, right? Like top down support. It's incredibly powerful, and I think we've already seen that, and it's very frightening. Coming from the left, like as much as the right.
This is a larger discussion I don't want to get into yet, because I still want to get into the roots of how I think this is connected to the COVID stuff. But I actually do think the U.S. this conflict benefits the United States. I actually think it was the U.S. made it happen. Like they goaded it into action. And I want to say something about sanctions, although this is not important. I do think sanctions work And I agree with Jessica that sanctions are an act of war, but they're just part of a, level 1, level 2, level 3. It's the way the ruling classes give threats. You tighten the sanctions to say, and if you don't give in to this, then we're going to go up a step higher. So it's the ruling class I do believe the ruling classes of the globe understand that sanctions are an act of war. So they calibrate how much they're going to make a threat, like how much they're going to
hybrid war now, right?
Yeah, yeah, and how much they're going to mean mug you to kind of say, are you going to be giving in? Because you understand if you don't give in to my face, then I'm just now it's going to get worse for you. So sanctions are just part of a series of steps that I think they will use to escalate as a part of an attack on a country and on a people. And sanctions, as we can see here, don't just hurt the working classes of the people sanctioned. They are intended. They also hurt the working classes of the imperial power that's delivering it, because the very sanctions we're delivering now are being used as the excuse for the working classes in the United States to accept more economic hardship and misery in the name of solidarity with the U.S. ruling class against Putin. Right. So more of this is trying to drive just like COVID did. Although this isn't my connection, this is only part of the connection. COVID was partly of building solidarity between the U.S. ruling class and its own working class. And now we see something we understand that's more obvious, imperialist war doing that. But I do want to go deeper into that word imperialism, because I think it's thrown around a lot. And I do believe this is an imperialist war. It is. I think there are people who look at this war, and many people I read, they will almost look at this war as conspiratorial. Like it's actually a planned war. Like it's a fiction. It's a kabuki theater, because behind the scenes, there are people planning things out. That is not the view I have of this world, although there is planning and there's conspiracy all the time. I actually think what we're seeing is a result of the anarchy of various conspiratorial units, be it China, be it Russia, be it the United States, be it those who want the world to be run on the what is the Chinese currency? Is it the yuan?
Yen, right?
Yen. Sorry, yeah. Those who see a vision of the world being run with the yen, and those who see the vision of the world with the being run by the dollar. Those two sectors are in battle with each other, and there's an anarchy of competition that I actually believe have produced these events. And that was one of the things that I, again, lost sight of, because a lot of times I use libertarians and folks like that as my best sources of current information. And I think I kind of fell into that way of looking at the world a little bit as almost conspiratorial, as opposed to understanding we don't live in a globe of conspiracy. We live in a globe of anarchy, of anarchic competition. And again, that's a Marxist theory. I'm not proving it, but that's the way I do look at it. So I want to start here. I want to start with Fabio Vighi, who I think, Jessica, you have been in episodes, or maybe you've heard those episodes where we've actually read this Italian Marxist guy who's talked about how COVID is connected to the economy and things like that. Are you familiar with that stuff?
Maybe I'm blanking, but I don't.
All right. Well,
but I'll catch up.
You'll be refamiliarized. So here's what he had said about COVID, and both me and Kenny were really like into it, and I think even Eduardo thought it was good.
We examined it with Rob, no?
Rob, yes, exactly. My friend from back in Cincinnati, who studies
economy and banker.
Yeah, yeah, and he really agreed with the view. He was like, "Yeah, this guy, this Marxist is kind of right about what's going on." So here's the framework that Fabio Vighi, and it's one I believe, and it's one I, in a sense, forgot. Okay, so here's what he said. He goes, the COVID crisis should be framed as a capitalist phenomena through and through, rather than a contingent microbial event that has taken the world by surprise. It is naive to think that the pandemic was merely an accident. The pandemic, he puts in quote, was unleashed as an accelerator of capitalist predatory violence aimed at the preservation, and this is an important word, of the financial sector and attendant hierarchies of power. They do so in the name of blind capitalist drive for profit making, which they duly represent. He goes on further. We are therefore in the midst of a global geofinancial and geopolitical mutation, one of those watershed moments that very rarely occur during one's lifetime. In this respect, economic implosion and the exercise of biopower should be regarded as two sides of the same coin. And he goes, the elementary reason, this is basic Marxism he's going to be saying right here, the elementary reason for the current dystopian acceleration is that wage labor, the pillar of capitalist mode of production and its social ontology, has grown, he's saying, obsolete. The exponential increase in technological automation has progressively eroded capital's capacity to generate surplus value and therefore wealth through the exploitation of labor. Since the third industrial revolution in the 1980s, capital invested in the real economy has experienced a dramatic loss of profitability as the employment of increasingly sophisticated machines has continued to eliminate wage labor well beyond the system's capacity to reabsorb it. He's basically citing two trends that are common in Marxist ideas of crisis and of crisis, really. So the first thing he's talking about is something called the falling rate of profit. That is a tendency that Marxism sees in it, because increasingly the more and more investment has to go into the form of dead labor or machines as opposed to living labor, which is where profit is extracted out of. And so the ability to extract profit out of industrial production becomes harder and harder and harder. And that leads to the place where profits are found to be increasingly in the financial sector, and in specifically in speculation. And that area of the financial sector is also more unstable and can lead to even deeper crisis. And so those are two of the things that Fabio Vighi was talking about. And he's saying that those are at the base of understanding why COVID came into play, that it was entirely economic. It's about what's happening, particularly the building up of financial capital as industrial capital becomes less of a thing because there's less profit to be generated out of that. That all these events are an attempt to recover profitability in the only way they know how, which is drive down the standards of workers, concentrate, again, this is an important thing, concentrate wealth and organization at the top, okay? And of course, Lenin's not talking about this, or Vighi's not talking about this, but Lenin does, and I'm going to get into that. This also leads to more explosive things like wars as these concentrations take place. So that's Fabio Vighi, and I'll stop there, because what I'd want to do is actually draw a connection between Fabio Vighi's vision of the world in 2020 to Lenin's vision of the world in 1916. And I think there's a lot of similarities. And so Lenin was writing about imperialism, and not writing about it as a policy, but writing about it as something that was endemic to capitalism because of crisis and because of trends of how capital would accumulate in the context of crisis, which I'm going to do I'm going to show you some stuff from that as well. But I don't want to go too far before, I want to see where you folks are at. So that's my starting point.
I don't have much to say about that. I think it's a point of view that I remember reading some of it before, and I don't find I'm not in disagreement with it. I'm not sure if I fully embody and adopt it, but I don't have anything else. So at the moment, this is the perspective that I'm open to.
Right. And I'm not introducing it like, okay, if you can't argue against this, then you got to believe. It's more just this is a framework for understanding it. And I think what you're kind of saying is, yeah, I can get the framework. I don't know if I agree with the framework, but I get the framework. Well,
I think at the moment it's the most appealing one. So I might just be in agreement with it because I don't see an alternative to it. So for me, we've discussed it with Jessica already. This whole pandemic is not the crisis that it's made out to be, as stated by the world and the media and all that. We've already discussed it. So what is then the reasons for all of this behind this? And Fabio
Vighi.
Fabio Vighi presents this alternative that I think at this moment I'm in agreement with, right? And then there's war, and then there's cyber attacks, and then there's something else that's going to be a cover-up for the way that our economy works now. So I don't have anything to say about it.
But he's again saying the pandemic is a fake crisis, but the crisis for profitability is not a fake crisis.
No,
that's the real crisis, but the fake crisis is attempting to hide. And that, so.
So would it be fair to say, basically, I mean, this is the first time I'm reading this text, but basically that COVID amounts to the controlled demolition of the global financial system for the purpose of resetting it, rebranding it, so that we can just try to continue unsustainable capitalism into the fourth industrial revolution.
Yes, he would probably be more specific about the rebranding, but yeah, essentially it is very much in line with the idea of, well, he believes in this notion of a great reset, but he thinks that it's an attempt to recover profitability. He actually, I think, is going to say then it won't be successful because the rate of profit will continue to fall and fall and fall as the amount of investment that you put into machines that are not human labor, which is where Marxists think all profit only comes from human labor. That's a theory, a Marxist theory. He's just saying that it will only mean that the rate of profit will fall even more in time with these plans that the capitalists have to automate everything.
I don't find any discord there. Oh, go ahead, Jesse. Sorry.
No, at some point I want to hear, this might be for later, but sort of like how China and Russia either are part of that, framing, or would he say that they're like messing it up? Well, that's why we're choosing this moment to provoke Russia.
Well, I would ask you, so I'm going to go to the next section. I want to get to Lenin's imperialism. And obviously there weren't giant computers then. There wasn't a bunch of data being collected. There was oil and there were resources. And Lenin's going to talk about imperialism at that time in terms of resources and the redividing of resources in the context of the world has already been completely divided. So how do you redivide it? But now let's add into it data, essentially. And that being another resource today that now must be captured. And if you don't capture it, then your opponent captures it. And if your opponent captures it, then that's a problem.
Yeah, China harvests data better than us.
Yeah, right. Yep. And that's a problem for the United States because that's another resources. That is, oil's a resource. Other things are resources, lithium, all that kind of stuff. But so is data, and all of this goes into the bin of got to get it all for all the various competing powers. We're saying maybe I should get into the sections of Lenin's imperialism and just note. And for me, I'm not going to say it's a one-to-one thing, but I see many similarities into the world that Lenin's describing back in 1916 to the world that Fabio Vighi is describing in 2020, and I think that's interesting to me. So maybe I'll share my screen.
For our audience, you'll share the link, right?
Yes. Well, it's Lenin's. I'm taking selections from Lenin's Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. It was written in 1916 at the beginning of World War I, as he tried to explain why World War I's were coming off when socialists didn't think such a thing was going to happen, and also they backed their own countries when it did happen. So these are just little snippets from the book itself that I'm kind of put together to help frame it. So first, it says crisis of every kind, economic crisis most frequently, but not only these, in their turn, increase very considerably the tendency towards concentration and towards monopoly. And he goes, monopoly, this is the last word in the last phase of capitalist development. But we shall only have a very insufficient, incomplete, and poor notion of the real power and significance of modern monopolies if we do not take into consideration the part played by the banks. So what he's talking about is you're seeing at that time a greater and greater concentration of industrial capital, so that big industrials that own all sorts of different things, so they can make all their stuff. Like they own it all, so they can make it all. And he's saying, well, we're not only just seeing a concentration into monopoly of industrial capital, we're seeing a monopoly and a concentration of financial capital. And he's putting them in terms of the banks. And he says, and this is again, he's describing a process that happens under capitalism that leads to a state of imperialism. That means there must be wars. It has no choice, that wars must be fought because of it. And that they're not policy decisions, that these wars are a result of the way capitalism works and its crisis. So he goes on, and again, these are snipped out of different parts, so I'm not going to say this is just one part. As banking develops and becomes concentrated in a small number of establishments, the banks grow from modest middlemen into powerful monopolies, having at their command almost the whole of the money capital of all the capitalists and small businesses, and also the larger parts of the means of production, the sources of raw materials in any one country, and in a number of countries. The transformation of numerous modest middlemen into a handful of monopolists is one of the fundamental processes in the growth of capitalism into capitalist imperialism. So again, he's describing a period at the dawn of the imperial age of capitalism, but he's saying the concentration of wealth in industrial capital, but also into finance capital. And finance capital, he actually believes, is the key towards the probability or the inevitability of this imperial stage that capitalism finds. He's saying this is what that process is. It's a process of concentration. Goes, the monopoly of the banks merges here with the monopoly of the ground rent, and with monopoly of the means of communication. Since the rise in price of land and the possibility of selling it profitably in lots is mainly dependent on good means of communication with the center of the towns, and these means of communication are in the hands of large companies which are connected with the same banks through the holding system and the distribution of seats on the boards. Again, he's just talking about this interpenetration of all these different institutions, communication, land ownership and land renting, along with industrial capital and finance capital, all coming into this giant web, largely, in the end, held under the control by financial capital. This means that the development of capitalism has arrived at a stage when, although commodity production still reigns and continues to be regarded as the basis of economic life, it has in reality been undermined, and the bulk of the profits go to the geniuses of financial manipulation. At the basis of this manipulation and swindles lies socialized production, but the immense progress of mankind which achieves the socialization goes to benefit the speculators. So he's talking about now how finance capital is beginning to dominate it, and it's all now a speculative profit grab, which he says creates even greater instability. The concentration of production, the monopolies arising therefrom, the merging or coalescence of the banks with industry, such is the history of the rise of financial capital, and such is the content of that concept. Thus, the 20th century marks the turning point from the old capitalism to the new, from the domination of the capital in general to the domination of finance capital. All right. And the characteristic feature of imperialism is precisely that it strives to annex not only agrarian territories, but even the most highly industrialized regions. Because one, the fact that the world is already partitioned obliges those contemplating a redivision to reach out for every kind of territory. And two, an essential feature of imperialism is that the rivalry between several great powers in the striving for hegemony, for the conquest of territory, not so much directly for themselves as to weaken the adversary and undermine his hegemony. So he's basically saying, I don't go after stuff just because I want it, but I see my opponent wants it, so I got to go take it. And finally, I'm coming to an end here. The capital exporting countries have divided the world among themselves in the figurative sense of the term, but finance capital has led to the actual division of the world. And I think this is an important statement. He's actually saying that national boundaries don't actually really define the basis for hegemonic powers. He's saying finance capital goes beyond national boundaries, but not into what is called super imperialism or hyper imperialism, where one giant bank octopus controls the world, but actually competing financial centers that may stretch beyond national boundaries. So it won't just be US, it'll be US NATO, and it won't just be China, it'll be China Russia. But all these regions represent sectors of financial capital that have some national origin of some sort, but their finance capital coming into collision with each other. Imperialism is the epoch of financial capital and of monopolies, which introduce everywhere the striving for domination, not for freedom. Whatever the political system, the results of these tendencies is everywhere reaction and an extreme intensification of antagonisms in this field. So to me, to reread this stuff and to think of Fabio Vighi talking about the world that is developing as it is, and to read about Lenin trying to come to understanding of why World War I is happening, it just reminds me that, yes, this is all coming down to economics. It's all coming down to how capitalism organizes the world and is organized around anarchic competition. and that we are at a period, because of the level of crisis, where the COVID crisis was a surprise, and it expressed a deep problem in the economy. Why would I be so surprised that that deep problem in the economy, which was not solved, should find itself expressed in a war that none of us want to happen, but is inevitable under, and even I was saying it has to happen in some ways because that's the way capitalism is. Why should I be surprised when it happens now? I shouldn't. I in many ways, my surprise of it, or my saying that it was me diverging from my own understanding of how the world really operates. And I believe that we are headed towards World War III, not because it's inevitable like next year or even in a month, but this is a war between the United States and Russia. And it is something that is desperately indicative of a deep crisis in the world and the system, but it's very much in line with the deep crisis that was exposed to us through this COVID fiction, because it's all based in many ways, or it's very centrally based on the concentration of monopoly capital, of financial capital, of speculative capital, of the falling rate of profit. And that is harder and harder to come by, and it's going to lead to more and more massive conflicts.
All wars are bankers' wars. Okay, I guess one question I have is I want to know how you see this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was that coherent? Because when I read and talk at the same time, it's hard.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for putting it up too, because I'm just much easier to take it in when I can actually read it.
Yeah.
Me too. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you kind of started to talk a little bit about this, but I want to know how you kind of see this, because I know this has been a thread on the show, kind of the debate between more of like a competing world powers view versus the sort of one world order, one world government type of thing.
Yep.
And just in terms of what you mentioned about national borders not defining financial centers of power necessarily. I mean, World Bank, right? Even just like going way back, like Rome, right? And then financial kind of global center, right? It was London, the Commonwealth. So yeah, I mean, do you see this as going something in between those? Like we're headed toward, like you said, China, Russia. Are we headed toward like a Eurasia, Oceania, Orwell type of thing? Is that what we're dealing with? Or yeah, like how does this play with nation states?
I mean, if I was to break this down into how I think it divides out, it's going to be the countries who are run on the yen currency versus the country who are run on the dollar currency. That's how I think this is going to come down. Now, are there political centers from which those fights emerge? Like, coming out of China or coming out of the United States, who really run the show? Yes. But so there are national centers for that, out of which the dollar emerges or the yen emerges. But China will be counting on a series of allies that are largely bound up through finance capital and investment capital through that finance capital for the possibility in some ways of using it productively and in terms of the building of industry. But I do think in all cases, for the Chinese and for the US, it's going to be harder and harder to find that profit because of the falling rate of profit in the context of what's happening to labor in the face of automation. But so that's how I would describe the world dividing, and how it's divided. It won't just be a war, but it will be seen as a war between China and the United States, but it's going to be a war between the financial centers represented by those two countries.
Yeah, I mean, Russia's already saying like, fuck your dollar, right?
Yeah.
And then there's crypto. I don't know if I want to open that bag of worms, but anyway, sorry.
That is going to be swept into that is going to be swept up easy by these, gobbled up easily by these powers. And all those folks are going to find themselves, where are you going to be? You're going to go with China crypto or US crypto? That's how it's going to come down.
And it's already gone down.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it could be independent from.
It's very indicative that like I would say like the number one weapon they used against the truckers was not actually even like police military force, but it was the bank accounts.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think the NWO folks, basically the New World Order folks, they look at these they have a different view of like things like the World Economic Forum and even of the UN. They look at those almost literally as the places of a planned global economy coming into form, and they'll say, look, they're being honest about it, and I look at it differently. I look at those places. Those are sort of like places where poker tables are laid out, and sometimes the poker table is more controlled by the United States, and sometimes it's more controlled by China, depending on who sets the agenda. But it's a forum of competition, by and large, and it breaks down, and you can see that. You can see how the UN is breaking down now, right along lines. The notion that the UNESCO somehow is this thing where everyone's going to get on board. It's like, nah. China's going to go one way. United States is going to go another. Now they're both going to go in the same direction. They're both going towards collecting everyone's data, automation, and stuff like that. But it's a race with each other. It's not a collaboration with each other about building a giant global prison for us. No, that's not what's happening. They're building prisons for the respective working classes, but they're doing that on the basis of extracting capital out of them so they can defeat their opponent in the extraction of capital and the collection of more capital beyond their borders. So that's why, like, built into imperialism is exploitation of workers abroad, but it must come out of workers at home. And so both ruling classes have to sell that. And that's true for the Chinese ruling class, that's true for the US ruling class, and that's true for the Russian ruling class, which I would still claim them a little bit of a sub-imperial power. But this whole Ukraine operation is an imperialist operation in terms of the United States, but also in terms of Russia.
Yeah, because people are accusing Putin of, doing imperialism or whatever, especially with the Donbass, despite the fact that, U.S. has been funneling weapons into Ukraine for almost a decade. Those people have been shelled. Most of whom, right, are ethnic Russians, Russian speaking. They consider themselves, to a large extent Russian or I don't know, maybe like autonomous.
Yeah.
Um,
and I would say that the unfortunate situation, and I agree really with what Eduardo was saying, I would support independent forces if they existed there, but they don't. You've got Ukrainian forces that represent the United States and Ukrainian forces that represent Russia. And both empires have their fingers knee deep. If there's anything independent there, it's going to be tiny and it's not going to have a voice.
Physically a vassal state, like at the expense of the actual people there.
Right. And one final thing, is there was a statement made by some Russian socialists that I think was interesting, that I think actually speaks to what I think we would say here, that I could show, but I want to see if we want to talk about this more.
I don't have anything to add. I think I appreciate you sharing with us that that this other side, this other point of view. I think it's very helpful. I really do appreciate it. I would think that it would be best if you showed this some
text. Yes, when we do the episode, I'll do the things. You're right. I should have done that in the first place. And
we've done with other articles before.
Yeah, and I just want to say that making the prediction I did and getting it wrong was just helpful for me in shaking my head loose and saying I had to kind of go back to my basic principles. Again, I'm not claiming this is right. I'm just claiming that these are the ideas that have helped me understand the world. And for me, currently, this is the stuff that still helps me understand the world I'm living in. So can I show this other video?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'll speak to what I think are our tasks here. Let's see what to do. Share screen. So this is a dude from Greece. He was with Syriza, which makes him somewhat not credible. But but he did get a note from these Russian socialists, and he read it aloud in this Russell Brand show. And I don't want to, and I think there's a lot of interesting things they say.
We received a letter signed by several organizations of Russian socialists from Moscow, from St. Petersburg. And allow me to read just a few extracts. I won't bore you too much of what they say. So here we go. We are told, they say, that the opponents of this war are hypocrites and that they stand not against the war, but for the West. This is a lie. This is Russian speaking. We have never been supporters of the United States and its imperialist policies. When Ukrainian troops shelled Donetsk and Luhansk, we were not silent, say the Russians. Nor will we be silent now when Kharkov, Kiev, and Odessa are being bombed on the orders of Putin and his camarilla, his entourage. There are so many reasons to fight against the war. For us, advocates of social justice, equality, and freedom, that are especially important. This is an invasion. No threat to the Russian state exists. But go on. I won't bore you reading the whole paragraph. This war produces incalculable disasters for our peoples. Both Ukrainians and Russians are paying for it dearly with their blood. Long after the dust has settled, poverty, inflation, and unemployment will affect everyone, and they continue. This war will turn Ukraine into rubble and Russia into a prison. This is Russians speaking. The opposition media have already been shut down in Russia. People are placed behind bars. Soon, Russians will have only one choice, and that is to rise up or prison. This war multiplies all the risks and threats to our country. Russia, they mean. Even Ukrainians who a week ago sympathized with Russia are now enlisting in the militia to fight our troops. Finally, fighting for peace is the patriotic duty of every Russian, not only because we are the custodians of the memory of the West War in history, Second World War, when 20 million Russians died, or Soviets, but also because this war threatens the integrity and very existence of Russia. And they finish off with this beautiful paragraph. Putin is seeking to connect his own fate with the fate of our country. If he succeeds, then his inevitable defeat will be the defeat of the entire nation. Then we may indeed face the fate of post-war Germany, occupation, territorial division, the cult of collective guilt. There's only one way to prevent these catastrophes. We ourselves, the men and women of Russia, have to stop this war. This country belongs to us, not to a handful of distraught old men with palaces and yachts. It is time to take it back. Our enemies are not in Kiev and Odessa, but in Moscow. It is time to kick them out. War is not Russia. War is Putin and his regime. That is why we, Russian socialists and communists, are against this criminal war. We want to stop it in order to save Russia. No to intervention, no to dictatorship, no to poverty. Russell, that was the best news I've had since the beginning of this invasion, reading this piece.
So just what I'll say is, there were some things I disagree in that statement or have issues with. But what I agree with is socialists in Russia saying that the tasks before them are to take on and take down their own government. And that is what I believe is, and to point out to workers in Russia that this war is going to come at the cost of Ukrainian workers and cost of Russian workers. And that is an internationalist statement, because I would say that socialists in the United States must make the same claim to their workers, not, oh, Putin's the enemy, but that Putin is not the problem. Kiev is not the problem. Zelensky is not the problem. The problem is Biden. The problem is Pelosi. The problem is Republican and Democratic Party, and really, the problem is the U.S. capitalist system and the oligarchy that rules it. So our job, our task, is to take them out of power and to take them down. And that notion was, again, something that Lenin spoke of in World War I, which was to say, not turn imperialist war into peace, but turn imperialist war abroad into civil war at home. Because I don't agree that our task is to make peace. Our task is to make war. Our task is to make war on our rulers. And that's what a revolution would be. And I also took issue with them saying, oh, look, don't do this because Putin is we're going to lose. And when we lose, we're going to be turned into like what happened to Germany when they lost World War II. Russian socialists did not call for the defeat of their own empire, which was the Russian Empire, because they were afraid of losing. They were just as afraid of winning. And the idea was called revolutionary defeatism. You call for the defeat of your own government, whether it wins the war, quote, or loses the war, because that's the internationalist position, not on the basis of, hey, we're going to lose this, so let's not do this. So just want to be clear about that.
That brings up sentiment about what we've discussed about Palestinians when, the liberals, talking points are about we support Palestine, but you're also supporting Democrats, and it's what I remember the episode that we did, that what we can do is in solidarity with the Palestinian people is what we do here as, other fellow workers, comrades, people who also are on the same vibe about wanting to deal with this, with the corruption, with suppression, with, just the oppression that we experience from governments. So I do appreciate you bringing us back to that, to that that sentiment that we have to be doing our work here. And our work here is to expose Biden, right? And to really draw the lines as to how we've gotten here, because right now all of the pointing fingers is at Russia, and we're not making those connections as to how this is actually how we got there. And there is a censorship of that. So for me and my work, it's about, exposing that we are being controlled and narratives are being controlled and manipulation, and a lot of discussions are banned. A lot of things are not being. That's how I think my job here is. Well, this is what we're doing here on What's Left, and sharing on all different kinds of platforms, even with the ones that are banning us sometimes and censoring us. But I think that's really what I think I would like for us, or for myself. I see my role in this as I continue the fight in schools and public education, but to see that I have a part in making sure that we discuss these things openly and go against censorship.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like governments are just inherently corrupt and only exist in order to hoard wealth and centralize power and control population. I mean, yeah, like these leaders, they're globalists, right? Like oligarch. I don't know. That video, we're in a lose-lose, I feel. I mean, it really is scary shit, because I don't see the US backing down. I mean, it's been since the 90s? Like, we've promised again and again, we're not going to expand NATO east. We're not going to add more countries. We're not going to take in Ukraine, right? We break the promise every time. Mm-hmm. And there's video, right, of even literally Biden, right, like our current president in, I think, the 90s, right, saying, oh, what would provoke Russia? It would be us expanding NATO and trying to incorporate more territory, right? We have fucking insane weapon. I mean, so many people have said this, right? But like, imagine if there were nukes or, even just lower level weapons, right? Like lined up on the Canadian border, or the Mexican border. Like, we would consider it a provocation of war. But obviously, I mean, they know, the US knows what it's doing. NATO knows what it's doing. So I don't see us backing down, particularly not with elections coming up, right? They always love to throw war propaganda around before an election. So, I mean, Putin's basically in a position where he either has to back down or this is going to escalate. And it really, I mean, if they, the no-fly zone, like if that happens, it's like we could go to nuclear war. Yep. We really could.
Yep.
So I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I think it's really scary.
I mean, I don't really see how this helps Biden's election, to be honest. but I do see how this helps the United States. I do believe that the U.S. drew Russia into this. Like, I think the U.S. wanted Russia to go in because I think they know that inevitably they are going to go to war with Russia and China. They know that that's coming, and they have to prepare for that. And as Adam Schiff said, I think he said this in 2014. He said, "Better to fight when he was talking about the importance of Ukraine. Better to fight Russia there than to fight them here." And that's what they're doing. This is a replay of the strategy they used when they drew Russia into Afghanistan in 1980s, and that's how they brought down the Soviet Union. And I actually think that they can take one of their pieces off the board, because they do know that they got to take on both China and Russia, and that currently this is the criticism that people like Tucker Carlson, who I do think understands that this could lead to World War III, and he's one of the few people in mainstream media who's been critical of it. But he goes, "This is a crazy policy, and you're just pushing Russia and China together." And I think the U.S. knows in the short term they will, but I think they can bleed Russia militarily if they keep them drawn into Ukraine. And that's what all those Nazis were about. That's what all those special forces, the things you talked about 2 weeks ago, Jessica, those articles about all the training that they were doing. They have been laying the groundwork for essentially a La Brea tar pit into which to draw Russia in. And they can just, the deeper Russia gets drawn in, the more the U.S. can continue to use Ukraine as essentially a place to fight World War III. And this is why Ukraine is I'm disgusted by liberals who put the Ukrainian flag up with this, really all it's doing is inviting the United States to get in there, when all that really is literally the United States is using Ukraine as a plaything. That property is a plaything for a global war that they have planned, and to see if they can bleed using the dead people of Ukraine, if they can bleed their opponent. They've done it in Vietnam. They've done it time and time again. And I'm so disgusted by liberals again, particularly the article I read by another liberal who said, well, maybe a limited nuclear war wouldn't be so bad. Maybe it would actually detract from global warming to some extent. Are you fucking kidding me? Like, you are a child. You don't know anything about war. Like, even these federalist people understand there's no such thing as limited nuclear war. It gets out of hand fast. And all their wargaming has Russia losing, and that's why 1 billion people die, because they know no nuclear power is going to leave the stage with those nukes not used. That's not going to happen. So when they get kicked off the stage, they're going to tip a board over. And a lot of people are going to die because of it. And they know that. So they know that's true about Putin. They know that's true about the guy in China. And they know it's true about the United States. None of them lose without using those weapons before they go. And that's why the only solution to any of this is revolution. Russians taking down their government, or U.S. workers taking down our government. If we don't do it, and if the Chinese workers don't do it on theirs, it's over. Lights out. That's it. And there's no policy, there's no planning behind the map, New World Order people, to think that mommy and daddy are there to take care of you. They're not. They're fighting each other, and it's a fight to the death.
Yeah, I agree. It's fucking disgusting. Like, I think all these people putting like hashtag I stand with Ukraine in their bios, like, I don't think half of them could find it on a map like 6 weeks ago, probably. But I do disagree with the election thing. I absolutely think that this is going to help them in the elections. I mean, approvals of Biden like a month or two ago were really, really low. I do think like the price of gas and that kind of stuff is going to hurt them probably more than they think, because people are fucking poor. I mean, so many people in this country are desperate as fuck. But they did, I mean, in terms of the liberals, they spent 2 years on Russiagate, so they didn't even have to try to hold up a villain. Like, that was already, all that groundwork was already taken care of. It doesn't matter that it's Nazis in the Ukrainian military. And nobody here like remembers any of the history because we're not taught it in school that, we flew in at the 11th hour in World War II. Meanwhile, Russia had, how many people did they lose? Like
20 million or something like that.
20, 30 million. Yeah, I don't know. I've heard everything from
a big part of
50
million,
up to like 50.
Yeah.
And one like justification that Putin's given, and take it for what it will, right, is to denazify Ukraine. That's a little rosy colored perhaps, but I do think a lot of people, and I hope it's not as many as it was the last election, right? But yeah, war pulls people in. Like, people are gonna vote, and they're gonna think that is gonna help, and it, like, of course, it does fucking nothing. Like, it does nothing but endorse the whole bullshit system that we should be tearing down. But I think, like, you already see it. Like, the people who had, mask up, get vaccinated, get boosted. Now they've got Ukrainian flags that they're flying, and they're posting, donate to this charity for Ukrainian children, right? And posting all these pictures, some of which I'm sure are real, but many of them are not. Many of them are staged or from, years ago. And then that's going to be replaced by, like, I voted stickers and all of this crap. So I don't know. And I also saw today, Democrats, I was just looking, I don't know where it is, but the emergency package, like the latest emergency money that they're trying to put through, that Biden's administration's trying to put through for new COVID strategy. And it's, vaccines and testing and antivirals and stuff. So it doesn't, I don't know, like, it doesn't seem like it's completely over, but I do think there's a sense of like, now I can like go out with my friends, and things are going to seem more positive for the laptop left, and people who have not been suffering. And I mean, the number of people just in my little community of like academia and people that I know from Seattle and stuff, like the number of people who have said to me like, oh, like, well, gas should be this expensive. In fact, it should be more expensive because of climate change. And it's fuck you. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it's so ignorant of how the majority of this country is actually living. Sorry, I went like all over the place.
No, yeah.
Reel us back.
No, I think I agree with a lot. I also think, like Jessica, as far as the Biden winning the people right now with the Ukraine, I'm not sure what his latest polls are, but I think it's something that is unifying both the left and the right, more so the left, I think. So for me, it does feel that this is one of those winning issues. And I'm beginning to see, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, but I'm beginning to see that COVID is being talked about less, not because of Ukraine, and not like it's changing the narrative. It's not. Rather, some restrictions are being lifted. Maybe some parts of the economy need to move, and maybe the strategy around this is not working. So obviously, Ukraine being on people's mind is a new way of trying to have a continuation of what COVID was. I actually think before the pandemic, there was also the weapons of mass destruction, and there was also other wars and immigration also being an issue. These things are actually a continuation of more of trying to find boogie people, and a distraction from the failures of the economy in a capitalist society. So I think that this is the adopted strategy currently. and maybe that's why there is a beginning, an ease of lifting of masks, and but there isn't a change in getting everyone's data, no, to be able to enter spaces or to be able to collect that, or the obedience strategy is still there, but there are leniencies, right? So right now it's just blaming the unvaccinated for continuous blaming of the unvaccinated. Oh yeah, I think that's where I think this is heading. I think this is a change in the way that in the way that we're seeing the narrative pivot.
Yeah.
One more thing, really fast, in terms of like messaging, like I think the stance that we should have as Americans should be no war in Ukraine, right? Which is what like people are putting in on their social media and even like fucking protesting. No war in Ukraine, but like not for the reasons that they're feeding you. But that's like a confusing message, I think, for a lot of people in this country who don't have the time or just don't want to like look into the history. You know, they're just looking at surface level mainstream media. So I think, yeah, I mean, I just don't think that's like a tenable like message to build solidarity around. I mean, even in Seattle, there's like a kind of little anti-war, anti-imperialist group that I was kind of hanging around with toward the end of my time there, kind of emerged out of people that I met through the like Free Assange movement. And they were like going to do a protest the other day, basically like a anti-war, but like also anti-NATO messaging. So kind of more aligned with, I think, our variations. And there were protesters like on the other side of the overpass who were also like no war against Ukraine, but they were coming at it from like a total neoliberal, evil Putin. And I think that just shows like it's just confused messaging, and like my friends were saying like, we don't want to be like confused with them, like we're anti-war, but no, right? And I mean, even just like, why does NATO exist? It's been 3 decades since the breakup of the Soviet Union. Like, what is the justification? I mean, it's insane. But you can't say that. Like people freak out, just like when you say, I'm unvaccinated.
Jessica, I consider myself to be a part of that anti-war movement. I consider myself to be from, that 2003, 2004, the war of Iraq and all of that. I remember, I've said it before. I was in high school here in San Francisco, and I saw everyone going to downtown, and it was massive. And I joined it. I walked out of school, and I still feel like I'm a part of that. I'm also a part of the anti-GMO movement, and organic foods, and I'm a part of, as well as, I was a part of the animal rights movement, and I'm also part of a lot of these movements. But these movements, I've noticed, they take this stance, but then they are adopting censorship. They are adopting, all of these other stands that it's conflicting. They're not making sense. How can you be anti-war and still be approving of all the censorship? We are in this moment in time where you're seeing, completely that our freedoms are being infringed upon. We're not able to say anything these days. And then all of these people, like the anti-GMO folks, they're all accepting all these vaccines with all the things that they do, with the modification with the biotechnology that the new biotechnology that we have in the vaccine. So I don't see how these people make sense of that. And I asked my friends that, you're part of the anti-GMO, you're part of making sure that, we don't mess with DNA, but at the same time, though, I don't understand how you make sense of accepting this vaccine. So I see there's a lot of conflicting positions that people are holding, and I'm still just, myself, I'm being ousted.
Yeah. I mean, well, the thing I would say is, in the same way that we have come to understand, well, I'll speak from my side of the left, socialist side of the left, probably includes the anarchists, I would guess, but I can't speak for them. We might have thought there was a socialist movement in the United States. Some people thought that Bernie Sanders represented the sentiment for socialism that exists in the United States. Not just Bernie Sanders, but all the people behind him, like the crowds of people who were supporting him. We might have thought such a thing existed in this country. That socialism was a fake. It was as valuable as fake gold because it had no content of value into it. It had no actual desire for revolution in it. And we probably thought we had an anti-imperialist movement in this country, and we don't. An anti-imperialist movement in this country would know one thing, that every war the US enters is an imperialist war. And it's entered not just at the price of those where the fighting is happening, but very much at the cost of the workers in this country. And that the only way to stop such a war, because imperialist war is rooted in the capitalist system, the only way to stop it is socialist revolution. And that means workers tearing down their own government and building their own working class democracy in the ruins of that government, or dual power, whatever you want to call it. And so to me, that's what the task would be, which is to say, the U.S. is engaged in an imperialist war, and it's doing so because of the deep crisis that the system is in. It's a war with Russia, and not with Ukraine or for Ukraine. It's a war with Russia inside of Ukraine that is happening. And it's going to come at the risk of all of us because it could be a nuclear war. But it comes directly at a cost to us, as we can already see, because they're already telling us, you're going to have to give this, you're going to have to give it. If you want independence in Ukraine, you got to give this, this, and this. And RT America is shut down and all this kind of stuff like, Eduardo's talking about. Can't say anything. So the notion has to be rebuilt from the very beginning, from the ground up, because it doesn't exist in this country, because we thought we had an anti-imperialist war against Iraq, against Afghanistan. It wasn't anti-imperialist. It was liberal. And so we have to start from scratch and I do believe, put at the heart of any anti-imperialist sentiment, a pro-revolution sentiment, because that's what the one thing I really agree with that letter was the Russians wrote, is that the task before them is to take on their own government. And that's the task for us here. Whether you're socialist or not, I believe those are our tasks. And just, if you would think about for a moment, what it would have been like for our US government to have tried to do something like this if our US trucker convoy had the strength of the Ottawa trucker convoy and was literally encircling Washington, D.C. at the very same time that they're trying to send, weapons and fight Russia. That's a very interesting kind of moment right there. And it gives you a sense of how workers could actually begin to challenge their own government in saying, who's really going to make decisions here that's actually for the benefit of us.
How about those biolabs?
Oh, I did want to say, sorry, I'm going to add this. I was talking to Brandy about this with all the money that Biden is talking about putting into these drugs for COVID, like that. All of that, and again, this is how I see it now. All of that is public-private partnerships with U.S. fusing with the state, the big pharma fusing with the state, and these are the definite preparations the country makes for war. Those sorts of fusions of your own government increasingly financially fusing its own interests with its own corporations and picking winners, in this case, Pfizer and Merck. There's a biotech component to the war that the U.S. is planning on making with China. They said it in 2018. I definitely believe it's not just about big pharma profits. It is about the U.S. state getting behind its most powerful pharmaceutical and biomedical institutions with the aim of preparing them for economic and then ultimately military warfare with its opponents.
Yeah, I mean, let's remember, these are DARPA-funded, DARPA-developed vaccines.
Yeah.
What about, though, because the Russian vaccine, right, Sputnik, well, they're tied up with AstraZeneca, right?
Well, they have a similar technology, and I have heard that maybe there was some thing, but it's a different vaccine. The Astras, they are similar in that they both use the adenovirus thing, and they have a double-stranded DNA inside. But
I meant the funding and the development of it. Is there not some connection there?
There might have been. I mean, Russia and Europe have a connection as well. But again, those things can be like that, but they can be as we can see now, we have all sorts of connections with Russia that are now being closed.
Yeah.
So I don't know how Sputnik is done. I still think that the future for Russia is going to be very much tied to putting itself under the wing of China to protect itself from the worst aspects of this war it's now in. And I think China knows that too. I think China knows that a war with Russia doing this, that they can get bled, but that also makes them more dependent on China. So, and I do, the one thing I think I got right was the fact that they weren't going to do this till after the Chinese Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if that's true about, that China basically asked Putin, like, oh, can you wait until after?
I think that's true. And I
do too. Yeah.
And I do think China's calling the shots on this one.
Interesting.
Certainly saying, hey, we'll back you. Here we're going to minimize the risks for you, because there are risks, and we'll protect you. You can fall into the soft net, but it's actually a net that they'll catch them in. And China's no nicer than the United States.
Yeah. Pretty funny seeing the U.S. go and ask Maduro for oil, though.
Right.
Like, are you fucking kidding me? How embarrassing. They just have no shame at all.
Same.
Like, shouldn't you be asking Juan Guaido for oil?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Oh, that is funny. But again, they get to keep getting a pass after pass after pass. They can do all these absurd, completely hypocritical things. And people are like,
Yeah, I mean, COVID's over and they've relinquished so much of the narrative, right? But like, has there been a single fucking arrest, nobody is being held accountable?
Well,
not even fucking Fauci. Like,
did you see that Pfizer is now making various court moves to release itself from any liability if it should be found that these things did a bunch of harm? Like, they're literally changing like their personhood status. It's like a strange backdoor legal thing, so that even if it should be found that all these things did all this harm, that they will not, because of their particular legal status that they as an institution are, that they can't be subject to having to paying some sort of fine or anything like that. So these people are shameless.
So disgusting.
Should we? Yeah. This is a good place to conclude.
Yeah. Thanks for taking the time, folks. This was good.
Yeah, this was a lively discussion, and there's all kinds of angles to it.
Yeah. See what Kenny thinks, hopefully, next week.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests in the episode notes wherever you found this episode, or on our blog at what-s-left.webmail.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. I remind folks, if you like anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our 8 platforms, or 9 platforms now, I think it is, Andy, right? On podcasts, Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, channels Bitchute, Odysee, YouTube, Rumble, and you can find us on Telegram. Right, good. And if you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. Andy will answer there.
Now Jessica.
And Jessica.
Yeah.
See, maybe she'll answer, because Eduardo won't answer anything. Kenny will. Jessica, maybe you'll answer some of the YouTube thing. People were saying such nice things to Eduardo. He didn't respond at all.
Cut. I will respond to all of that.
That's gonna be good. Damn it, we're keeping that. No, I guess not.
I'm Eduardo Arca with co-host Jessica and Andy Lipson. Thank you all very much. Ciao.
Bye.
Andy, why are you trying to put me on the spot?